Good evening, America, and welcome to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report. Dodgeball, shrinking government's waste in the fraud. We want to thank our partners tonight, AMAC, for joining us in this conversation, making this conversation possible. The Association of Mature American Citizens, more than 2 million strong, making a difference in today's country in so many different ways. And all throughout tonight's show, we're going to be taking a deep dive into how much waste, abuse, and fraud is actually harming you, the American taxpayer, and what the Trump administration and their partners in Congress is going to do about it to fix it. It's no longer a novelty issue in Washington, but rather an existential one. Why? Because the country is hurtling towards $37 trillion in debt. That's almost a once unimaginable amount. It is a crushing amount of debt. Now, led by the world's richest man, Elon Musk, the Trump administration is off to a pretty good start. Over the last few weeks, Musk and the House DOGE subcommittee have identified some stunning abuses, like millions of dollars in loans, federally backed loans, going to children. That's right, you heard me right. Thousands of people, clearly long dead, who remained on Social Security's eligibility rolls. Then there are small stories, too, that speak of the reckless elitism and how your tax dollars are being spent in Washington. Do we really want $1.5 million spent to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces? What does it have to do with us? Or how about $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia? I'm not making this up. This is what your tax dollars were spent on. The American people have already answered the question. Do they want to put a stop to it? The answer is a resounding yes, they do. A supermajority of Americans want government spending cleaned up and trimmed. And over the next hour, we're going to be talking to leaders on the front line of this debate, including the chairwoman of the House DOGE subcommittee that today had an extraordinary hearing about taxpayer-funded journalism organizations. Marjorie Taylor Greene will be with us in a second. We're also going to talk to the former Comptroller General of the United States, who spent decades probing and highlighting e-waste. He has a really incredible insight into it. We'll have a lot of other great guests as well, but before we get to that, I want to introduce my special co-host for the evening. She is the CEO of AMAC and my very good friend, Rebecca Weber. Rebecca, good to have you back on.
John, I'm so thrilled to be here. You know, it's not easy business making government work better or at least cost less. And the Department of Government Efficiency is really tackling a big one. They're rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse in a system that's ballooned to over $6 trillion a year. So DOGE is promising to slash inefficiencies and rethink how Washington spends our money. And Americans agree. You know, it's time to cut the fat and get real about a government that actually delivers.
Yeah. It's an exciting moment, and AMAC has been at the forefront of this debate long before it was popular in Washington. AMAC was already leading the charge in this over the course of the next hour. We're going to tell everybody how you can get involved with AMAC and become part of that 2 million person strong army that is part of AMAC. Right now, you go to amac.us/no noise. You can check out how to become a member. Very special discount. We'll mention that throughout the show. But we're very lucky at the top of the show to be joined by someone who's on the front lines of this extraordinary debate. She chaired the hearing today that delved into a very important question. Do we need to spend tax dollars on taxpayer-funded news organizations anymore? We're going to get a great answer. Buckle your seatbelt. All right, joining us now from the great state of Georgia, the Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was just shouted out a few minutes ago by President Trump at an event at the White House. Congresswoman, great to see you again.
Great to see you, John. Hi, Rebecca.
This was an amazing hearing today. I think people got to see what elitism looked like and how disconnected these government-run news agencies are from the American people. I was thinking that maybe today the obit was written for government-funded journalism. Am I wrong about that? Is this the end of government-funded journalism?
Absolutely, it's the end of it. You know, like I said in my closing statements, they can hate us on their own dime, not the American people's hard-earned tax dollars. So yes, we need to end corporate public broadcasting and completely defund NPR and PBS.
You know, Congresswoman, I think Americans' concerns over this biased information being spouted by NPR, I mean, just look at their handling of Hunter Biden's laptop story and PBS's reporting on Elon Musk's actions. What do you share a little bit about what you heard from the CEO of PBS and NPR, and what information should the American people know about their views?
Well, it's actually shocking. Catherine Marr, this was her first time appearing before Congress under oath during a hearing. And, you know, she has so many past statements on her social media that are shocking. She called President Trump a sociopath. She thinks white supremacy is the biggest problem in America. She is as far left as you can possibly get. Now, listen, she hasn't been with NPR for even a year yet. NPR knew about all of her radical social media posts. They hired her anyways, because today we found out that 87 people that are on the board for NPR are registered Democrats, and there's not one single registered Republican on the board for NPR. So it's no wonder that they hired Catherine Marr. We also discovered that today on NPR's own homepage for all of their news that they're reporting to the entire country on the American people's hard-earned tax dollars, they didn't have one single news story on my colleague, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who had attacked Governor Abbott for being in a wheelchair. What a horrific thing she said. And it's so shameful. So their news is so biased. As a matter of fact, most of the news that they report, not only NPR but PBS, has a 90% left-leaning bias, and America's so sick of it. They are so sick and tired of it. So Americans have basically been taxed and forced to fund this left-leaning, hard left-leaning bias, and we're going to make sure that we stop that.
I can tell you one thing for sure. AMAC members really applaud your efforts, and we appreciate that you're putting a spotlight on this. We're also thrilled to see what DOJ is doing, and want to just shift a moment here to talk a little bit about the specific evidence that led the DOJ subcommittee to conclude that the recent attacks on Tesla vehicles and facilities are coordinated, perhaps. The subcommittee's letter suggested potential involvement of certain NGOs in those attacks. Can you elaborate on those assertions?
Yes, and that's an ongoing investigation. We're very concerned about the groups that are organizing these different so-called protests that have really led to firebombing Tesla dealerships, burning Tesla vehicles, even attacking regular citizens who are just simply Tesla owners and drivers. We believe that there is funding going and massive support going into all of these organized, dangerous and violent protests. And let's be honest, we've seen this before, right? Remember BLM? Oh, they were supposed to be, you know, mostly peaceful protests. And then we watched cities across America burn every single night. Police officers were attacked, over 93 police vehicles destroyed, and over $2 billion in damage all across American cities during the entire so-called Summer of Love. Well, I think this is the same playbook with the same groups and the same donors. And what we don't want to see is any federal tax dollars funding that. So this is an investigation that is ongoing, and I personally had asked our great new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to be looking into that, as well as watching very closely members of Congress like my colleague, Jasmine Crockett, who is fueling these so-called protests.
Yeah, such an important thing to tackle, confront hate on the front lines. Congresswoman, you mentioned this about the nonprofits, and it opens up a really interesting avenue for saving Americans' taxpayers, because there are a lot of nonprofits that got their tax exemption under the notion that they serve the public interest. But if they're lying, if they're not telling the American people the truth, if they're encouraging violence, they could be taxed on that money. That means new revenues for the government. Is one of the ideas you have to revoke some of these tax exemptions and treat these groups as taxable organizations going forward?
I think that's a great idea, John. We'll be looking at all kinds of solutions like that. But yeah, why would any group be allowed to be tax exempt and not pay taxes just like everyone else in this country when they're using their money to fund such dangerous and radical ideas and attacks on an American business? Tesla is an American business, and Tesla owners are regular Americans. By the way, most of them are probably Democrats, because they all believed in the Green New Deal and looked at Tesla as a cure to the so-called lies of climate change. But yeah, I like that one, John. We'll probably be looking into many things like that.
Wow, interesting.
President Trump, we know he's looking, or actually has issued a recent executive order aiming to terminate taxpayer-funded housing for undocumented immigrants. Now, this really emphasizes that those resources should be prioritized for American citizens. But it raises a question, what policies or legal frameworks previously allowed undocumented immigrants to access public housing assistance?
Isn't that such a shocking statement that you just said? Publicly funded housing for undocumented illegal aliens? None of that makes sense. Here we have senior citizens that can hardly afford to buy groceries these days. And, they have to make choices between being able to pay their rent or mortgage, afford their life-saving medication, and really afford the cost of living. But yet here our government and many state governments and sanctuary cities and states have been housing illegal aliens. It's the most insulting, absurd idea, and I can't even believe it's happened. But yeah, that's definitely going to stop, not only with Republicans in charge in Congress, but definitely with President Trump.
Yeah, really remarkable. Congresswoman, there's obviously a sand clock ticking to get a budget bill that codifies everything that President Trump's agenda already has in place and all these incredible savings that you're identifying through your work. Walk us through a little bit of the process of how you'll be able to get some of these savings, get them into the budget bill and get them done, and when do you think that will be done?
It can't happen soon enough. John, I was one of those that was not happy about voting for a CR, but we are working very hard and looking forward to doing reconciliation between the House and Senate, where we can actually pass our budget and our policies and fund the government the way that we believe it should be funded, the way America voted for it to be funded. You know what else is an interesting concept? When we get that done, John, this will also shut down a lot of these rogue judges and the rulings that they have been making. Because with Congress, we're the lawmakers, and when we make laws, judges have to uphold our laws. So we look forward to putting into law things like complete border security so that a judge can't stop deportation flights. We look forward to getting those things done, and we can do that with our budget and reconciliation process. So we're hoping to see movement probably by the second week of April, before we have a 2-week break in April for Easter. We should be seeing good news on that.
Wow, that's quick. That's exciting.
That is great news, especially as we watch the national debt continue to increase, surpassing $36 trillion, and addressing government spending is certainly a priority. So beyond reducing the federal workforce and real estate, what specific agencies or programs do you see as maybe the highest priorities for reform?
I think the highest priority, in my opinion, came out of my first hearing that I did chairing this DOGE subcommittee on oversight, and it was discovering that we need identity verification software put into all of our government payment processing systems. I know that sounds like a boring concept, but it could literally save approximately close to $1 trillion. Identity verification software will identify who people are. Number one, are they a citizen or not? Are they in our country? Are they a criminal organization? Are they dead or alive? These are important things that could save the American people a tremendous amount of money, approximately $1 trillion, and that's all by stopping waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that we can make, and I'm working with President Trump, and I'm also working with several of our chairs in Congress to get that accomplished. See, that's my number one priority because I think it's so simple.
Yeah. Running government like a business would do a lot to make us better off in America. You're a former businesswoman. You know exactly what that means. Congresswoman, what a great honor to have you on today. Thanks for joining us on such a busy day. We sure appreciated the time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll get to another House DOGE subcommittee member, Congressman Michael Cloud. He's working just as hard as Margie Taylor Greene, getting a lot done. But before we go, I want to ask you a favor. Go to amac.us/no noise right now, because for a limited time, you can get 47% off an AMAC membership. That's not an accident. Yes, it's for the 47th president. But where do you get 47% off anything in America today? Go do it. Go join the Patriots. I'm a card-carrying member. You go do it too at amac.us/no facebook.com/no noise. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America, to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report. Dodgeball, shrinking government waste and fraud. Joining us now is someone that is working to do all of that in Congress, the Doge Subcommittee member and Texas Congressman, Michael Cloud. Congressman, good to have you back on the show, sir.
Well, thank you. Good to be with you once again.
You're doing a lot of work. You had a very meaningful hearing going on today about whether the government should and taxpayers should be subsidizing news media. Tell us a little bit of your takeaways of the first few weeks of Congress's Doge Subcommittee work.
Yeah, it's really awesome to be involved in this. You know, a lot of the questions that we've been asking for some time as an oversight committee, it's certainly nice to finally have an executive branch who's working with us to find the answers to these questions, to make sure we're returning a good investment to the taxpayer on their dollars. And of course, what's been uncovered just in the first couple months of the Trump presidency has been quite astounding to find some of the ridiculous, some of the outlandish, and frankly, some of the evil things that our taxpayer dollars have been going to. And it's left the American people, you know, for a while you'd hear the elite saying, oh, this is important. It's, you know, we don't like paying taxes, but this is really important work that we're doing for whatever reason. And we're finding out that that's certainly not been the case in the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars. And so to finally have the technology tools that have been brought to the table and to be able to work with an executive branch that's working to get these answers instead of obfuscating has certainly been a tremendous blessing.
No doubt.
Congressman, you've advocated for dismantling the Department of Education, really suggesting that the move could redirect more funds directly into local classrooms. Can you elaborate on how eliminating the federal department would translate into increased resources at the local level? And then maybe what mechanisms could ensure that these funds are effectively utilized?
Sure. Well, you first start off with the principle that, you know, the people who have the greatest onus and ownership in educating their kids are the parents, the families, the communities, those people closest to the child. And to think that we, way far away from the Capitol, should be, you know, mandating these sort of things and directing this sort of policy is inerrant. And then certainly when you see that since we've really taken stock in this, the Department of Education since the 70s, the more money we've poured into it has really just created a layer of administration in education, has not led to better outcomes. Reading, math, science scores have stayed relatively flat, and when you look at how we're competing on the world stage, our students are falling behind compared to other countries. And so the major investment we've made from a federal perspective is not having the desired outcomes. And so every dollar that the federal government takes, you know, every dollar we spend, we have to first take it from state, communities, from the people we are supposed to be serving, or from their kids and grandkids. And so that's exactly what's been happening. And wouldn't we be better to, instead of taking the money and then having them beg for it back, to just not take the money in the first place, let them keep that in their families and their communities, and let them be more effective at providing an education for our kids and for our grandkids.
I like that approach. Now, a recent poll shows that 68% of voters, including 85% of Republicans, do support redirecting Doge savings to bolster Social Security and Medicare. These trust funds, we know that they're set to go insolvent in a short 8 to 10 years unless something is done. So given your focus on fiscal responsibility, what specific reforms would you advocate for to really ensure that those programs remain solvent without increasing taxes?
Sure. Well, first of all, the thing, as you mentioned, we've got to point out, because, you know, anytime you hear any sort of conversation from the left, you'll hear, oh my gosh, they're working to dismantle, people are going to be left out on the streets, and all these sort of, you know, the sky is falling talking points coming from the left. But the truth is if these are going to be sustained, then we've got to course correct. Right now, we're headed off a fiscal cliff as a nation, and certainly these programs are a part of that. And so we've got to course correct. And what we're finding, first of all, through Doge is that there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse through it. The president, in his joint address, went through the millions of people who are on the rolls, over 120 years old, who are getting these. And then you compare that database with what's going on in, for example, the Small Business Association, and then you find out that that they're receiving grants and loans as well. So there's a lot that can be done just through being the due diligence that any sort of business or company would provide, and taking that to every agency of our federal government. And then you look at right now how states are incentivized, specifically, for example, in Medicaid, where the people that the program was designed for, getting 50, 60 cents reimbursement from the federal government for every dollar spent, but then single adult males who are able-bodied, could be, should be in the workplace, are incentivized at something like 90%, a much higher rate in some of these states. And then if you're an illegal alien, you're not supposed to be in the country, then you're reimbursed at 100% for some of these dollars. This is a backward perversion of what that program was designed for and built for. And so obviously that's the first place to start. But when you say, look, we're going to address the misuse of this, of course, from the left, you get all the Chicken Little stories and messaging from them. But this is about making sure, again, that we're turning good return on investment to the American taxpayer.
Congressman, you gave some of the great examples of small business loans that were going to 11-year-olds and under, extraordinary waste to people who've long been dead but still on the rolls, eligible for money. You've picked one that I think a lot of people didn't believe at first, but it is definitely true. We spent 20 years trying to keep the Taliban out of power in Afghanistan. In the last few years, we've given a lot of money, taxpayer money, to the Taliban. Tell us what you found.
Well, exactly. That came up in a hearing to where we find out that taxpayer dollars are going, if any other business had been funneling money to the Taliban, they would be in jail. But because it was going through the agencies in our federal bureaucracy, somehow that was okay. And to find out that the taxpayers are funding both sides of the equation of war they are very mad, very upset, and like, what in the world am I working this hard for if this is the stuff that our dollars are going to? The fact that we're funding our nation's enemies is egregious. It's treacherous. It's just immoral. And obviously, finally we're bringing light to this so we can address it.
Yeah, so important.
Congressman, you've been such a strong supporter of our Second Amendment, and Second Amendment advocates have really been urging DOGE to halt what they're calling gun control studies by health agencies like the CDC and the NIH. They're arguing overstep into policy areas beyond public health. So as a staunch defender of gun rights, how do you view DOGE's role in really reining in these agencies? What oversight measures would you push to ensure that those taxpayer funds aren't used for what some see as really politically motivated research?
Yeah, that's one of the huge ways that the federal government grows is from study, and they're presented on the floor usually through a suspension bill as these benign things, and so it's a study, it's a report, and that's usually the toe in the door, so to speak, to the greater programs, the greater control. Those studies are usually going to left-wing organizations who come up with the data that they want to find in order to advance the agenda that they want to advance. And so certainly we saw through COVID how this federal government under the Biden administration had well exceeded their authorities and emergency powers to do all kinds of nefarious activities against the American people, from taking away their choice in health care to running people out of their business. People were threatened to lose their law license, their medical license, all these things that would happen because they overused what was supposed to be emergency health authorities. And we even saw some governors at the state level begin to take those sort of authorities, and it was concerned certainly at the federal branch of using that to confiscate firearms among law-abiding citizens. And so this is a tremendous concern. Thankfully, we can trust this administration not to go that route, but it's important for us to use this window of opportunity with this administration to codify these things into law. We've introduced legislation actually to deal with the fact that many people are concerned about the federal government using a health emergency, for example, to confiscate firearms from lawful abiding citizens. And so we have legislation. It's gaining a lot of support here in Congress, and we're working to get that through this term.
You've been working tirelessly. I've seen this real quickly, sir. We've got about 20 seconds left. What do you think the final number that Congress will achieve? What will those savings look like when we get through the summer?
Well, Elon's proposed that we could find $1 trillion in waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement, corruption. That sounds like a lot, but we've just gotten into a couple agencies and we're finding hundreds of billions. And so you begin to look at that and you're like, wow, this may be real. And President Trump talked about $2 trillion as the goal to get us back to a balanced budget. And so I'm optimistic that we'll get close to that.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. Well, I know one thing, you are tirelessly working at this. We've seen you day in and day out on the DOGE subcommittee. It's a great honor to have you on the show, sir.
Oh, thank you. Honored to be here. God bless
Thank
you.
you so much. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, a man who's been preaching about waste, fraud, and abuse in government for decades. He's the former Comptroller General of the United States, David Walker. He'll join us. In the meantime, I got a quick homework assignment for you during the break. Go to amac.us/no noise and go sign up for a great AMAC membership. You're going to get 47% off this month if you go there today. Go check it out. It's an incredible investment, one of the best investments I've ever made. Go match me on my 5-year membership, 47% off. All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. When I first came to Washington, one of my first beats was to cover waste, fraud, and abuse in America. And I would turn to an agency called the Government Accountability Office. It was the ultimate expert on exactly what was being wasted and how government was misspending taxpayer money. We're very lucky to be joined today by someone who spent his career, or a good part of his career, digging into those issues and keeping the American people informed. He was fighting fraud and waste before it was popular in Washington. He's the former Comptroller General of the United States, David Walker. David, good to have you on, sir.
Good to be with both of you today.
We love the work you've done over the years, and I was thinking of you not too long ago because I saw this headline in the New York Times which said, in the Oval Office, Elon Musk said there was fraud in government without any proof, and I thought, well, anyone who ever read a GAO report would have known there's a lot of it. How bad is the problem? You've seen it for decades. How bad is our waste and fraud and abuse problem in America right now?
Well, first, we should have zero tolerance for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, but it'll never be zero. Every year, there's a improper payments report that's issued by the government with the Inspector Generals and GAO that estimates the amount of improper payments, which includes but is not limited to fraud. The GAO issued a report a year ago that estimated that fraud was anywhere from 200 to 500 billion a year over a several-year period. But it's important to understand that included COVID. And I would not be surprised if there was $1 trillion worth of fraud associated with COVID alone. And so I think the fraud numbers were higher during the COVID period than they are in regular operations, but they're still too high.
Sir, given your extensive experience leading the Government Accountability Office, how do you assess DOGE's current strategies that they're using to identify and eliminate waste and abuse within the federal agencies? Are there any specific methodologies or maybe best practices from your tenure that you think DOGE should adopt to really enhance their effectiveness?
Well, first, I think DOGE is good news, bad news. I think what they're doing needs to be done, but I think the way they're going about it has got some fundamental problems. First, they're not doing an audit. They're basically doing a transactional review using artificial intelligence to try to identify possible or probable fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. A lot of the things that they're identifying, quite frankly, are not fraud. They're not illegal. There are differences in policy positions between the last administration and the current administration. In other words, the last administration funded a bunch of things that this administration would not fund, and therefore they're canceling a bunch of contracts, redirecting the funds. I think one of the things you need to understand is only Congress can cut spending. DOGE can't cut spending. The president can't cut spending. Only the Congress can. And so the only way that they can save money immediately is through hiring freezes and reductions in force. And I think that's why they pivoted rather than just looking at contracts to be able to look at headcount. Because in that situation, the Congress just gives you a maximum. They don't give you a minimum.
Great point.
Interesting, but critics are saying that Doge is going too far, maybe acting outside of their legal bounds. Specifically, what is your take on the pushback from the courts?
Well, there are a lot of different cases that are pending, if you will, and those will have to play out in the court. People have argued that a lot of the things that they're doing are illegal. I haven't seen any evidence of that. They do, however, need to be much more transparent with regard to what they're doing, how they're doing, who's doing it, and what they're finding. For example, if you look at Grok, which is the AI application of X, which is owned by Elon Musk, Doge claims that they've saved $115 billion. But when you ask Grok says that's what they claim, but only 2 to 12 billion can be verified. So I think, the bottom line is that, we need to separate the wheat from the chaff. I think both sides, both proponents of Doge and opponents of Doge, are saying things that are inaccurate. And ultimately, the courts will resolve the issue.
Yeah. David, you did one of my favorite things. I was a little bit younger when you did this, but in 2012, you toured the country and you just asked Americans what reforms would they like to see. Common sense people who have to make their own balanced budgets in their own families, what they wanted to see. Remind us some of the things that you learned on that amazing tour.
Well, I had a hypothesis that the American people are a lot smarter than the politicians realize, that they could handle the facts and the truth, that they knew that you couldn't spend more money than you make, charge it with a credit card, not have a day of reckoning. And basically what I was able to get was 77 to 97% agreement from representative groups of Americans on a goal for debt to GDP, on a ratio of spending reductions to revenue increases, on budget reforms, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare, defense, taxes, government organization operations, and political reforms. 77 to 97%. Washington is a lag indicator. They don't want to end up doing anything until there's a crisis that forces them to act. We're in a bad situation. It's getting worse every day. We need more leadership, and we're going to need a fiscal commission and a constitutional amendment that limits debt to GDP if we want to restore sanity and sustainability to our federal finances.
Yeah, great point.
And during your tenure as Comptroller General, you really did emphasize transparency, but long-term fiscal sustainability. So how do you envision a Department of Government Efficiency really balancing the political pressures of this short-term cost cutting with really the need for, strategic investments and long-term efficiencies?
Well, the truth is that at best, Doge is going to make a very modest dent in our huge fiscal gap. We're spending $2 trillion a year more than we're taking in. Doge is going to have a modest impact on that because the big changes are going to require legislation. And legislation will require bipartisan support in order to be successful and sustainable. And one of the concerns I have about Doge is that, it's pointing out that there is fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. That shouldn't be a surprise, but it's further undercutting trust and confidence in government and further dividing Republicans and Democrats in Congress, when in reality, the major things that we have to get done are going to require bipartisan support and legislation.
Yeah, Congress is the ultimate purse string holder. They're going to have to fix this
Correct.
when it's all done. David, when you look out, there's always been this third rail politics. We can't even talk about entitlement programs, but those major programs, particularly Medicare and Social Security, have been stolen of money for a long time. They need to be replenished, and entitlement reform is going to have to be on some radar. Is there a political will to have the right, responsible conversation for entitlement programs right now?
The truth is that the biggest deficit we have in Washington in connection with social insurance programs is the leadership deficit. They want to wait until there's a crisis at the doorstep before they act. That's irresponsible, and it also is inconsistent with the will of the American people. As I mentioned on the tour that I did, the framework we came up with got 77% support for Social Security reform, 82% support for Medicare reform. The key is you need a statutory commission where everything's on the table, but not everything is equal, that engages the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, that solicits input, and make a package of recommendations for an up or down vote in Congress. That's how you get it done. And in order to be able to sustain it, you need a constitutional amendment. I'm working on all of these, and stay tuned, because the states are getting fed up with the federal government, and they may end up exercising their rights under Article 5 of the Constitution and sue the Congress for failure to call a convention of states to propose such an amendment as far back as 1979.
Wow. That would be a big moment. You think that's on the horizon?
I hope and pray that it is, because God knows we're on an unsustainable path.
Yeah. Well, one thing I know.
And you've said that.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you've said that Doge has, is really doing a good job, but perhaps a drop in the bucket. I mean, how deep does the waste in these programs like USAID contracts, the canceling of millions of aid for USAID, how deep does that really go?
Well, it's significant, but understand, waste is not necessarily illegal, and waste in many cases is because of policy differences. And what Doge, I think, didn't realize when they first started, but now I think they do, is you can cancel any contract you want, but that doesn't reduce spending. It just frees up resources to spend on something else. Only Congress can cut spending, and the president has to ask for, basically an impoundment, and then the Congress has to rescind it. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen this year.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of talk, but the action is what's going to really matter. David, one thing I'm certain of, for the last 3 decades, you have dedicated your life to getting this issue on the forefront and getting Americans' voices involved in it, much like AMAC does in all of the policies it does. It's a great honor to have you on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks to both of you for having me. All the best.
Yeah, thank you, sir. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, one of my favorites, the former Assistant Secretary of State and current national spokesman for AMAC, Bobby Charles, will join us. But in the break, do me a favor. AMAC is on the front lines of this debate of making America's spending reasonable again and getting common sense back into government spending. Go join AMAC today. Join me. I'm a 5-year member. You can get a 47% discount right now on an AMAC membership in celebration of President Trump's, of course, 47th presidency. To do that, just go to amac.us/no noise. That's amac.us/no noise. Go do it. Go match me and get 47% off. That's a great deal. All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back, America, to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report, Dodgeball, Shrinking Government Waste and Fraud. We're being brought to you by our good friends at AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. And I'm still here with AMAC CEO Rebecca Weber. She's my special co-host for tonight. We're going to bring in another special guest. He's a frequent on this show. He's AMAC's national spokesperson, former Assistant Secretary of State, all-around great guy, Bobby Charles. Bobby, great to have you back on the show.
Always a pleasure to be with you all.
All right. You once occupied one of the great seats in all of Washington, chief investigator for one of the great congressional oversight committees. Have you ever seen anything like what we've seen in the last few days, and including today, where the real receipts are being asked for, which is, what are you spending our money on?
Often we worked hard at oversight in Congress, but we did not have the power to get in. We had subpoena power, but we were often turned back. We were not given really the authority to go in and get underneath the rocks. We wanted to flip all the rocks, but we couldn't get under all of them. And you have to remember, there's a very small body of people who do oversight in Congress. There are 2,000 federal agencies, and they spend trillions of dollars. And so we were, in many ways, a symbolic effort to kind of keep people on their toes. What's happening now with Doge is absolutely spectacular. I just cannot tell you how happy I am that we have a president, and Donald Trump is doing in spades what Ronald Reagan started to do back in 1982 with the help of Elon Musk, who of course works for OMB, the same way that Peter Grace was an outside businessman who worked for Ronald Reagan. But the extraordinary cuts, I mean, I've looked at that. Just yesterday I did a deep dive on how many federal jobs are there, and what do they really look like, and how many contractors are there that work for the federal government, since the federal government itself doesn't produce anything. They have to contract for everything. And, you're looking at somewhere between, roughly 3 million federal jobs and maybe twice or three times that in terms of contractors. We actually don't even know. What so far has been put in the crosshairs is about 200,000 of those jobs. But, it's a great start. And, even if that's just 1/15 of the overall FTE, what you're telling people is you can't stay at home. You can't spend money on what people don't want. You can't spend money we don't have. And by the way, if you're involved in any kind of fraud or abuse, you will be caught. So I love it. Honestly, it makes me sleep better at night. And as far as I'm concerned, put more fuel in the Doge gas tank and let them go.
Bobby, as a lawyer in the White House, former chief counsel on an oversight committee and Ninth Circuit clerk, I have a few questions. First, are we seeing a judicial coup with these activist federal judges really trying to stop President Trump? How does that end?
Boy, two very good questions there, packed into one. Yes, I think in some ways we are. Everyone from, Bill Barr to former or sitting federal judges look at this and I think roll their eyes. The first thing you've got is I counted them up last week, there are 123 cases challenging President Trump's executive orders, and those range broadly from the birthright citizenship to the relief of these probationary employees to stopping things that are genuinely waste, fraud, and abuse, including at USAID and other places. Interestingly, of those 123 cases, and there'll probably be more tomorrow, the ratio of Obama Biden judges to all other judges is 10-1. So the first thing that tells you is, in terms of a judicial coup, that tells you that the plaintiffs, who are largely unions and leftist organizations, are picking, they're forum shopping. You're not supposed to do that, but they are. They're picking Obama and Biden judges. Then you look at the rulings, and the rulings are also, even though not all of them are complete, they are 10-1 in favor of this activist anti-Trump judicial bench. The bottom line is you've got federal district judges, and there are probably, I don't know, 800 or 1,000 of those in the country. You have federal district judges who are saying that they want to play president of the United States for a day. They want to turn around our national security policy. They want to stop the protection of the borders. They want to reinvigorate agencies that have basically been spending money and force those agencies to spend money on things that are, if not illegal, at least imprudent and certainly not faithful to the appropriations that gave rise to the spending. And you've got this judge who wants to bring back 300 Venezuelan gang members, and the gang members, that particular gang is designated a foreign terrorist organization. It's an FTO. So the rules change when you're exporting people who are admittedly members of an FTO. Their rights are completely amputated, and they're not citizens to begin with. And besides which, most of them were actually criminals, had a criminal record in Venezuela before they ever got here. So the president is the president, and a federal district judge like this fellow who's gotten quite forward-leaning, shall we say, in his bench seat, they need to sit down and be quiet because they have a role. Their role, by the way, is as an inferior court judge. The only thing the Constitution tells us is we have to have a Supreme Court, and we do have a Supreme Court, but we also have circuit courts and district court judges created by Congress. And these federal district judges need to, stop, in a sense, behind the curtain colluding to stop Trump.
A quick moment on Doge. Is everything Doge is doing, in your view, legal? And how deep do you think the cuts really are? The left is really going nuts.
Yeah, well said. So the cuts are utterly legal. I mean, the bottom line is back to Dwight Eisenhower, presidents have had what they call presidential advisors. They've had national security advisors who are not Senate confirmed. They have all kinds of advisors. In fact, today we probably have 100 advisors for every advisor that Dwight Eisenhower had. And this particular advisor, Elon Musk, is a businessman who is very similar. I mentioned a moment ago, Peter Grace, very similar to Peter Grace. Peter Grace had led a very big organization with, I think, 48,000 employees. Elon Musk has led companies with, I think, with contractors somewhere in the range of 145,000 employees. Those people know, in the same way that Jack Welch and others knew, how to make an organization efficient. They are not bureaucrats. They are deliberately not bureaucrats. They understand that there is a bottom line, and the bottom line in this case is the return of money to the American taxpayer. So legally, what's happening is very similar to the executive order that Ronald Reagan signed in 1982 to bring the Grace Commission to life. This one is called DOGE. It's the same basic thing. The shell or the core element of that unit was established in 2014 by Obama, and it was established as an oversight unit to do digital oversight. The president just expanded it by executive order. It works for the head of OMB, who is Senate confirmed, and that is Mr. Voigt. And what it does is the advisor, in this case Musk, gives his advice to Mr. Voigt and the president. The president in turn directs his cabinet members and Voigt to make the cuts. It's what an executive branch does. An executive branch manages the executive agencies, and that's what President Trump is doing with the help of Elon Musk. So yes, every I has been dotted, every T has been crossed, and this counter narrative that there's some sort of an illegality going on, I would say, is the last gasp of a group of leftists who have basically lost the House, the Senate, the White House, and now they're trying to use the judiciary and they're trying to protest for fraud and break in and protect it. Well, it's a bad plan. It doesn't work. If there are laws being broken, I suspect they're on the other side. And what worries me, Rebecca, and we know this, I was just at a Federalist Society meeting where a guy that sort of waved himself around profanely and looked like he might be interested in doing some violence. I think they've lost all their tools. I think the left is pretty much out of options, and so they're attacking DOGE, and they're using the courts, unfortunately, to overreach and try to amputate the president.
Bobby, got about a minute left. The founders gave the power of the purse ultimately to Congress and the House. How important is it for Congress to use the power of rescission? It's not a term we've heard a lot in the last 30 years, but literally pull back and call back money that was allocated that should never have been spent.
Yeah, so that's the beginning of the reform process. A rescission is when you have money that doesn't get spent at the end of the fiscal year, or it was being spent or planned to be spent on the wrong things. And if it can't be spent, if it's what they call 0-year money, that money has to come back into the federal treasury. So that's the beginning of the process. I would argue that we ought to start literally redlining agencies and departments, and only Congress can formally redline them or eliminate them. I'll be honest, the Department of Education pre-1979 did not exist, and the scores of all American students were better pre-79 than they are today. So what have we gotten for that $268 billion except a bunch of bureaucrats?
Yeah, great point. I think most Americans are nodding their head when you hear you say that. Bobby, as always, a great healthy dose of wisdom from you. We always appreciate you joining us. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Good to have you. All right, folks, we're going to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, Rebecca and I have just one more break to talk about things that we learned today. We learned a lot, but in the meantime, I got a homework assignment for you. Please go to amac.us/no noise, amac.us/no noise, because right now, for a limited time, you're going to get 47% off an AMAC. There's nothing in America you get 47% off now. Go check it out today. Go match me on a 5-year membership. I'm a proud card-carrying member. You should be too. amac.us/no noise. Go check it out during the break. We'll be right back to wrap things up. Welcome back, everybody, to this final segment of Just the News special report, Doge Ball, Shrinking Government Waste and Fraud. I've been joined for this whole hour by the amazing AMAC CEO, Rebecca Weber. I'm going to bring her in. We just got a minute left or so. Rebecca, we heard a lot of big ideas today, whether it was David Walker, Marjorie Taylor Greene. A lot of people have big ideas to get this fixed, don't they?
They sure do. And, the guests really peel back the layers of a government really drowning in excess. I mean, look, Trump, he's backing DOGE to slash the fat from the $6.5 trillion federal budget, spiraling out of control. And Americans support that. I mean, fraud, waste, and abuse aren't just buzzwords. They're bleeding taxpayers dry. And with the national debt topping $36 trillion, the clock sure is ticking, John. So the vast majority of Americans, they want to make Washington accountable again. They support President Trump's critical mission to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. And they're looking forward to seeing, what's going to come of it all. I think today's guests, they're really putting on real pressure for real change.
Well, the best part about today is that these storylines don't get in the traditional news media, but the great partnership we have with AMAC, we're able to bring this to the American people. I want to thank you, Rebecca, and all the great patriots at AMAC for the support you do in putting on these great conversations. I think they really benefit the American public.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, good to have you. All right, folks, that wraps things up. One final homework assignment before we hand things off to Grin Stinchell. Please go to amac.us/no noise and go consider a membership. Match me. I'm a 5-year card-carrying member of AMAC. You could be too, and you get 47% off. Just go to that incredible website. Use the promo